All set.
Karis, why don't we start with you?
I'm Karis Lustig. I'm the Director of Public Works, and I'll be the town's staff liaison for this committee.
Okay. Mary Ann Cooley, Vice Chair of the Select Board. Maybe I'll call names, so we'll go around my screen here. Kevin?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Keene, member of the Select Board. I'll talk
Keith?
to Keith. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Keith LaFace. I'm a town meeting member for Precinct D and the citizen on the board. Thank you.
Doug?
Hi, Doug Palmer. I'm I think, citizen of the board. Is that right? Or a new
Citizen of the
member?
town, yeah.
Okay, citizen of the town. Yeah, thank you.
David?
Hi, David Montgomery. I'm, I guess I'm sitting here as the town's representative to the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, and I'm also town meeting member.
And I think you're also here as part of the Transportation Committee, so you have multiple hats.
Yeah, I am, I guess, still nominally the chair of that committee, but that'll be interesting to see how this goes.
All right, Dimitri.
Dimitri Gorenberg. I'm the representative of the Rail Trail Committee.
Great. Justin.
Justin McCullen. I'm chair of the TMAC, Transportation Management Advisory Council Committee. I also sit on a couple other committees. I also sit on the Transportation Committee as well as the Local Emergency Planning Committee.
Robert.
Hi, I'm Rob Rossi. I am the designated representative of the town moderator.
And my understanding is that you are a regular commuter. Rob?
Once intended to be once the pandemic lets up. That's right.
Okay. All right. I know that we have at least one attendee who I'm just going to mention for people here, right? One. Kate, you're in two places. Are you just attending to listen for this first meeting? Are you able to talk to us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We were doubling up on making sure we had the host covered, and I did want to say hello to everyone. I don't know if you can see me. This is a very strange thing that's happening. Okay. I'm Kate Fitzpatrick, the town manager. I'll come in and out. The committee is very important to me, but I have a lot of other committees at the same time. So Karis is going to handle this one. And thank you for letting me say hello, Mary Ann.
Okay, great. And then we do have an attendee, Jackie DeWolf, if you were in a room. So I don't know if Jackie is able to just say hello to people and introduce herself as well. She's not a committee member for a variety of reasons, but she does have expertise that I believe will be helpful to us.
Hi, everyone. Jackie DeWolf, so a resident in Needham, a mom of two. So here both as a resident and citizen, and then my full-time job is working for the state transportation department as the director of sustainable mobility, and happy to be a formal resource in my state capacity, and then obviously very interested in this just as a mom and a resident and community member of Needham.
Great. And Duncan, you have now joined us. If you would just introduce yourself, say hello, and which committees you are here to be the liaison representing. Oh, you're on mute, please.
Sorry for all the delay and inconvenience. I did track it down. Yeah, I'm basically been on the town transportation committee, the one that's oriented towards the commuter rail and MBTA service for a long time. Let's just put it that way. And so I guess I'm certainly looking at that perspective. I'm also the town's representative to the MBTA advisory board, so I have that connection as well.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I think if we can start this evening just by taking a look at our charge. Everybody had that charge in advance of the meeting. Part of what I would articulate sort of in my layman's terms for this committee is the town has a variety of committees related to transportation. Some are very long-standing, some are newer. They're all sort of stovepiped. Not clear that we would put a transportation committee together in the same way if we were sitting here today, really thinking about what the transportation options are for the town, what we would like to see happen if we really thought about a transportation master plan for the town, how we think about incorporating elements like complete streets, which isn't in anybody's charter right now, other than the select boards kind of, and Karis's is something to think about. So I'm really hoping that this group organized can help us think about transportation as a whole in Needham and how we might organize better to accomplish the goals that our citizens have for us. And then once we come out with those recommendations, and the goal is to do that in a short period of time, in a 6-month window, to make those recommendations, that then we can decide, you know, if committees go forward as they are, or if things need to be reconstituted in some way, and what are the legal structures that need to be amended and put in place to make those changes occur so that we can move forward efficiently. Does that sound like a good goal?
Yeah.
Is there something else that should be included that I missed? Not seeing it.
That sounds great.
Yeah,
That's a
we're
lot
good.
of work.
I agree.
So, and with that, I don't have any recommendations from the start. So I'm really hoping that this becomes clear as we discuss it. I'm just going to say that also. Sometimes I go into something and I might already have some theories about what might be best. I don't have that this time. I think it might be useful, in fact, if we could sort of go around our Zoom room so that the folks who are here representing each committee can talk a little bit about the nature of the work that their committee does, and also help us to understand the frequency with which you meet, so that we know how you fit in relative to other committees that we have here at the table. And then after we've done that, as you can see on our agenda, we'll turn to Karis to talk about the item that I identified that's not in a committee right now, which is complete streets, which is another major element that I think we need to figure out how to integrate. So David, you are, I think, the longest standing committee. I could be wrong about that, but I think the Transportation Committee is in fact the most senior of all our transportation committees. So if you could start, please.
Okay, thanks, Marianne. I'm going to rely on Duncan, who has served as the chair as well for multiple times over the years. If I get something wrong, I assume he will correct me. But as I understand the history of the Transportation Committee, it was originally formed at a time where the town was actually at risk, or there was a period where the town's commuter rail service was kind of done away with by the Department of Transportation, so they could make various changes to the delivery of service to town and the track, etc. There was concern that if the town didn't have enough people in place paying attention, keeping holding the MassDOT's feet to the fire, they might not restore the service that had been promised to be restored. And we're going back a few decades, but there was nonetheless, the service was restored, but the committee, I think, of which Duncan was probably actively involved at that time, and there are one or two others who also go back that far. They understood that a big part of what the committee existed to do was to kind of keep an eye on the MassDOT, keep an eye on the commuter rail service, keep an eye on bus service to a somewhat lesser degree, and make sure that these services don't get cut. And our charge officially refers to special attention to commuter transportation. And in my several years as participating in this committee, that has translated to roughly quarterly meetings where a good amount of our time has been spent talking about the state of repair of platforms in the town, at stations, as well as the problems with service delivery in terms of time and other problems on the trains, how they're configured, et cetera. During the time of this committee also, it went from a period of being, the town was run by the select board, and then it subsequently we have the town manager model. And I think this is not a criticism at all, but an observation. I think that with a town manager model, you have somebody who really builds their own connections with players in the state system, and is trying to do that efficiently, and is actually, quite frankly, in my opinion, very good at doing that. And the committee had this history of advising the select board, creating memos of problems that we've observed, and we would do this. We've done that up until a couple of years back, and we increasingly noticed that our memos to the select board and we're not really telling anybody anything they didn't already know or had already thought about and had come to conclusions about. So that's kind of the quick nutshell version. I'll also say, wearing my Regional Transportation Advisory Council hat, that is, for those of you who may not know, that is a small part of the Boston Metropolitan Planning Organization. It is the sort of the kiddie table at the MPO. So all the smaller organizations and the towns that don't have a full seat on the MPO can nonetheless participate through the Regional Transportation Advisory Council. And I'm going to call it either the Advisory Council or the full name to avoid confusion with the Rail Trail Advisory Committee. In the acronym, I suggest we avoid RTAC at all costs. That body meets monthly, the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, and I've served on that for several years. But in doing that, have been exposed to the whole notion of how various monies move in and out of the federal and state system to do infrastructural investment, and we as a town have not been kind of queuing ourselves up to get in line for those monies as aggressively as I think we might want to do. We do right now. You all are probably familiar with the retrofitting, the rehabbing of Needham Street, Highland Avenue corridor, and that's a project that was in dream phase for literally decades, and we're finally reaping the benefit of it. But it's that kind of project that I think I'd like to see us pursue more frequently, even if we don't all necessarily benefit from it in the next few years. It may take a long time. So those are the two hats I bring, or perspectives I bring.
And so one thing I take away just from that is that the Transportation Committee is a town constituted committee that has a current definition in the town of Needham. The Regional Transportation Advisory Council is something that will go forward regardless of what this group does. And the question is, can we more efficiently provide input to them in some way, shape, or form in a way that will better gain access to dollars that could be used to benefit Needham people who are commuting, participating in life, whatever they're doing.
Yeah, and the flip side is true too. That is, how do we, so I've gone to those meetings now monthly for many years. I served on it as a chair, which made me at the grown-up table too, because the Regional Transportation Council sits at the table for the MPO. So I've managed to get some knowledge over the years of how that funding system works at the MPO. And then I regularly, there's a staff member of town within the DPW, Ryan Hoyland is the head of the transportation, of highway department. And he's attended many of those meetings with me. Collectively, we sort of understand how this system works. And now we're chomping at the bit to how can we now take the wishes and the desires of Needham, back to that process and let's put some bids in. You know, what are we waiting for? Now, that doesn't mean I'm not writing the proposal or doing it jointly with Ryan. I mean, we both have this dream that we could come up with a system where, as collectively as a town, we're doing that more regularly. And I think we have the start of the base, but it's not just what can we say at a monthly RTAC meeting, Regional Transportation Advisory Council meeting. More importantly, I think, is how can we develop a system where we're submitting requests for funding on a every couple of years basis, that knowing we're not going to get all those things, but we should be working at it that kind of rate.
Okay, thank you for that.
Mhm.
All right. Justin, do you want to talk
Sure.
about TMAC?
Sure. Thank you. So as some of you may be aware, the TMAC is a committee that reports to the select board. It was inserted at some point, probably, I'd have to say maybe 10, maybe 15 years ago. I'm not fully sure, but I know Kate was initially part of the initiation. So it was initially put in to be a forward-facing committee to the residents, residents and business folks, people that came to the community, that would listen and kind of work with residents to try to figure out creative solutions to try to ameliorate certain traffic situations, trying to make recommendations for crosswalks, signs, signals, etc. It's reactive based. So basically historically, we have not met in a planning perspective. We've only met to, if a petition came before us, we would look at the current, basically what we can do to try to fix the problem. So it's very reactive as the design is meant to be. We meet monthly. It's 5 residents that sit on the committee. There's also then 4 to 5 members of the town that also sit on the committee, 3 of which are voting. We have police, we have a highway representative, we have an engineering representative, and then we also have a staff, I wouldn't say consultant, I don't know what's the position that you serves, is more of advisor to the committee, where if we needed to get into the nuts and bolts of the manual for uniform traffic control devices, which is a manual that guides markings and signage for the state as well as the U.S. It's a federal document, and how it applies in Needham. We would ask our staff liaison to be able to kind of interpret that for us and provide that feedback. So essentially, we try to come up with solutions. One of the things that's been, it's been going on for a while. I've been on the committee since 2015. I've been chair since for the last year and a half. It's very repetitive issues. And I think those repetitive issues are some of which are things that we can actually try to fix, some of which we can make recommendations to fix, but will involve significantly more capital than we have the ability to be able to have in access to, and I think even the town. When we're talking about some of the larger signals or some of the larger intersections, high hazard intersections. Obviously we hear about a lot of. I hear on every issue, and so TMAC is aware of every bad intersection in town, some of which come up. Maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and we know that we're not going to be able to fix a certain situation. We can only, but there hasn't been a mechanism for us to be able to kind of retain that, keep that on the radar, and kind of, maybe integrate that with, capital planning, integrate with long-term, kind of transportation planning. I know that it happens with DPW, but there is no linkage between, we are the TMAC kind of sits in that forward-facing position and does hear from the residents, there's a lot of concerns. There's some stuff that can be fixed with lower cost solutions, but there's there are some significant geometric improvements. There are some significant engineering improvements that we just don't have the ability to do. So we're essentially telling them, no, we can't do anything, and then we're losing credibility with the citizenry, which I think is an issue as year after year as we go on. So I think what we can come up with as a committee in the next several months to kind of help this issue, and to be able to provide some. I think that is one of the most beneficial things I think that this committee can do. But that's kind of where TMAC is. I can answer any questions on. I mean, we have the description that Karis sent for what the committee does, but like I said, it's a lot of repetitive issues, a lot of issues that that I think can be rectified, but unfortunately, there's not that connection with planning, capital planning and et cetera for longer term.
So I just wanted to take a pause, and I probably should have done it after David as well. For everybody in the committee, for either David or Justin, are there any clarifying questions that you have to understand something that you've heard? Okay. Clear as mud for the moment.
That's good or bad.
Good.
Okay, great.
Okay. Dimitri.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so the Rail Trail Committee has existed since about 2015 or so. It began when we were sort of in the construction stages, I guess, of the trail. And initially it met monthly when things were most active. Then once that the main part of the trail that exists now was built, it met rarely, and I think for a year or two, it may have not met at all. But we're now kind of with some new organizational drive. We're now meeting quarterly, so that's kind of where we're at now. The main goals at the moment are, and a couple of these are relevant for the larger task, is to work on getting the trail extended to Chestnut Street, which would make it much more valuable as a commuting resource, among other things, because then you could get to both the shops on Chestnut Street, but also to the commuter rail station at Needham Junction. So that's one focus. The other future-facing focus is trying to develop the northern section, sort of between Needham Heights and Newton, kind of if you picture kind of going behind Staples and the Muzzy property and all the way down to Needham Heights, which involves a lot of potential roadblocks, not least of which is rebuilding a bridge over 128. So that's kind of perhaps a longer term goal, but one that would also, I think, improve connectivity in terms of not just I mean, for a lot of reasons, one of which is just making it much safer and easier to cross 128 rather than the existing road bridges. So and then the third goal is to try to figure out how to connect, once that northern segment exists, how to connect it to the southern segment, given that there's an active rail line in the middle. So that connects to things like safe streets and so forth, because you probably have to do some kind of on-road or next to road situation. So that's kind of the commuting facing aspect of it. There's also just like the park and rec aspect of the trail committee, which may be less relevant for the purposes of this committee, but is a big part of what we do. There's a parking lot that was just built down at the near Charles River Street. There's various amenities that we're looking at in the future, such as playground and picnic tables and those kinds of things. So those are all aspects of what the committee focuses on. Just two words about where I come from on the committee. I am a member of the BCRTA, the association that kind of pushed forward the rail trail from the start, and I've been on that almost since it started. And I'm also in a
BCRTA is Bay Colony Rail Trail, just for people who don't know BCRTA.
Yeah. And I'm also an abutter. I live on Richardson Drive, so I look out the window and see the trail. And that's kind of how I first got interested in it. And given the long history of abutters opposing things like rail trails, I thought that being involved from the start would, given that I supported it, would also bring my neighbors along, which it did. So that's kind of where I come from.
Great. Any other questions for Dimitri about the scope of rail trail work right now? David?
Yeah, I realized that I didn't mention that our committee doesn't interact with the public all that much. In reality, we almost never have had, we've had a couple people show up over the years, really that kind of thing. Justin mentioned that his group is always interacting with the public. And I'm curious whether the rail trail has that component built into it. Do you interact regularly with the public?
I mean, we rarely. Our meetings are open, so occasionally we've had people come to the meetings, both when they were in person and now on Zoom. But it's, you know, a little bit. The BCRTA, the advocacy group, does a lot more interacting with the public, both from the point of view of just, you know, getting information about the trail and what we're trying to accomplish out there, and also from the point of view of fundraising for especially, I mean, much more actively when we were building the trail, but still to some extent. And now we have been fundraising for the Medfield section, which is being built right now. But in terms of Needham, there's that's sort of most of where the interaction comes from, not the trail committee.
Duncan?
I just wanted to mention, with respect to the longer history of the Transportation Committee, we certainly have had plenty of public interaction, a lot of which has gone on to occur in the Select Board's chambers as well, on issues like train horn noise. And so, yeah, very often our meetings, I think, are quiet, as Richard suggests. But yeah, there certainly have been lots of people come to some and do a lot of expressing opinions.
I think one of the kind of differences that I see here is the open meeting talking about something that is, you know, generating buzz, et cetera, brings interest to a committee. We historically, TMAC, everything on the agenda is a public petition. That's how it ends up being. So the purpose of the meeting really is really driven by the petitions that come in. We really don't have the time when it comes down to it, or else these meetings will be, you know, very long to be able to kind of digest. We'll try to bring some. We've now started to refer back to maybe DPW in, like, you know, two meetings to come back and report back on some sort of study. But really, the agenda is driven by whatever petitions come in during that month. So it's really forward facing. So just for a point of clarification, as opposed to just being an agenda item that's generating interest.
Okay. Duncan, do you want to talk for a moment about the advisory board? This is another role that would stay no matter what we do right now.
Right, yeah. Basically, every city or town of the 79 sort of members of the MBTA has at least the opportunity to have a representative on the advisory board, which meets quarterly, basically, and provides a route to kind of surface issues that a municipality may feel really strongly about, and get questions before the MBTA. MBTA usually, you know, presents information. A lot of the information flow is kind of one way, but there is a real opportunity for issues to be raised there. And you know, not every town has a representative, but yeah, last year folks asked me to take that on, and I said fine. So I mean, I do know a lot of people at the MBTA, and you know, they know me. So I think it's going to work out, but definitely would in that case also need a route to sort of say, okay, it's time to bring something up with, in that venue, from the town's point of view. And, that's something certainly I need to know about. Yeah.
Well, and I would just say, as a select board member in town, I don't actually know what are the issues that would be the right ones that we should be thinking about. I'm sure Kate would advise us, but it's not just a natural delineation that I
Right.
understand with what rises to that
Right.
level.
Right. I mean, there's so much the MBTA covers, but I think of examples. The South Coast Rail Project. All right, and it's done a little bit of waffling between trains maybe going via the main line and Attleboro versus going down the Old Colony, and different, and so not too long ago, folks from the South Shore said, "Hey, wait a minute, how are you going to get all those trains down a single track?" And that sort of question got to the T, and I haven't really seen. I think sometimes the answer coming back goes to the towns that have kind of asked the question rather than becoming part of the sort of plenary session of 30, 40 odd representatives. But it is a route to raise something with the MBTA, which could happen in other ways as well, but it's there. And again, it's a route also if there is, they've recently presented sort of in advance some of the ideas of the the bus network redesign. And so obviously I know that both Newton and Rep and I were looking very carefully at that to see if there were sort of changes really in the wings, and in our cases there really isn't so much. It's a lot more well inside 128 where most of the action is on that.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was one of the observations I was just about to make. We've spent a lot of time actually talking about the MBTA and referring to rail for the MBTA, really the commuter rail, which is what comes to Needham. But in fact, we do have MBTA bus routes that also run through town that I'm not sure we've tended to maybe pay a lot of attention to, right? But when I think about some of probably the workers who are in town who are coming, the bus routes can be vitally important for them to be able to get here. So it's the routes are critical, and where they stop in town, and the frequency and the times of day that they operate are actually quite important as well. So
I mean, there's also a service change process the MBTA has, which you're probably aware of. Well, they do have hearings on that if they're actually going to propose a change in service span or headway or whatever. So that usually comes out pretty quickly and becomes, if it's a problem, that gets identified pretty quickly too.
And we've now learned that occasionally they have us have hearings on things that they actually don't intend to institute. That I think is a rare occasion, but it was kind of shocking to live through that one. David, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, we at the Transportation Committee flagged sometime in the last couple of years when discussing the notion of commuter rail service and whether to increase it or not. We've long struggled to try to advocate for the notion that we can live with different types of service. If you take away a given run of the commuter rail, you got to give us bus at the same, we can live with that. But that sounds logical to the end user perspective and the resident of Needham, but the Keolis and the T are not talking and exchanging resources regularly enough to make that kind of, they're just not facile at making that kind of a shift. So we're really up against some pretty big factors to try to, yes, I recognize as a committee, and several of us have talked about how valuable the bus can be to certain constituencies, and every time somebody proposes to take away the Saturday service, I would like to say, only if you give us more bus. They're not prepared to make those trade-offs. Last thing I'd just like to mention is the MBTA Advisory Board also sits as a permanent member on the MPO at the big boys table again, a big person's table, I should say. And they sit, they have influence there. So Duncan's role to influence what they say at that table is important.
Great. Any other questions about the committees that we have before so we've done our planes, trains, and automobiles, and we don't have any planes, but we definitely have trains and automobiles. But then there's another whole class of, pedestrians and bikes and skates and skateboards and those vehicles. So maybe if we can turn to Karis to talk about some of our complete streets work that has not made it into any committee.
Sure, thank you. So the Complete Streets policy that we have in Needham was adopted in 2017, and it was part of the state's Complete Streets program. And this was a program that the state rolled out that basically gave communities the opportunity to access funds specifically for making improvements for multimodal transportation. And it enabled communities to really develop their own vision of what that looked like. So there wasn't any specific prescriptive requirement that you had to meet. You really had to define for your own community what multimodal meant. And at Needham, we really focus on making sure that we can have trucks, cars, pedestrians, and bikes all in public transit, all accommodated. And we also had a focus really on a network approach to this. So one of the things we focused on in DPW is that we right now have a sidewalk inventory that far exceeds our capacity to be able to maintain it. So effectively, we have about a 40 to 50 year life cycle on sidewalk, and sidewalk does not last 40 to 50 years. So we've done a lot of improvements on our sidewalk in Needham, but we really have looked at areas that may be overserved for sidewalks. So do we have secondary roads, cul-de-sacs that have beautiful sidewalk on both sides of the road? And then we have areas that are main arterials and main areas that people are transiting that don't either have any sidewalk or only have sidewalk on one side. So we did a study in DPW a few years ago to look at the condition of our sidewalk and determine where we might be able to invest our resources. In addition, we did, as part of our Complete Streets policy, we ended up doing a Complete Streets prioritization plan so we could get some funding from the state to implement some of these Complete Streets projects. We actually had an in-person meeting. I'm not sure if any of you were at it just before the pandemic took hold. And we had a really high participation for this type of hearing and a lot of engagement and people very interested in creating this prioritization plan. So we put the plan in and we were approved actually for our first project, which we're hoping to start this summer, which is a readjustment of the Dedham, Harris, and Warren Street area. So that intersection is a high conflict area for pedestrians and for vehicles. It's not a particularly well designed intersection. And it also is one that's really close to a school. So there's a lot of kids that utilize that for walking. So that's what the first project that we put forward, mostly because it's one that we just get a lot of general complaints about, concerns from citizens or concerns from the police department. And we wanted to address that particular area. But we don't have any political body to really provide specific instruction just on transportation related areas. And I think a lot of these things are very sensitive. Sidewalks, people have very strong feelings about whether or not they want more sidewalk. And I know people have come to the TMAC to ask for more sidewalk, even though there's some question about jurisdiction or resource. So it would be useful, I think, for DPW to have a political body to be able to go to talk about what these issues, because we can come through and we can give all the quantitative data. So we can say, we have X number of miles in this type of condition that we want to rehab. We have this many sidewalks. But I think, at some point we make a prioritization judgment. A lot of the time right now in DPW, we've been focusing on schools, transit, and business areas. So that's been the main focus, but we do quite frequently get requests for areas that are sort of outlying. I know 4th Street, we've gotten a lot of requests on parts of Central, Charles River. And so these aren't areas that have typically been on our radar for areas for expansion for sidewalk. Not saying we should or shouldn't, it's just being able to have an entity to help decide how DPW can best prioritize its resources, because those resources are finite. Just trying to think if I missed anything. The one downside I will say about Complete Streets, and I'm hoping maybe there'll be some funding adjustments, is there's so many communities now enrolled in it. Originally, it was a first come, first served basis. So you turn the money over quickly and you were able to reapply for funding. I believe now you can only apply once every 4 years. So we received money, I think 1.5 years ago. So it would be another 2.5 years until we could reapply for another project. But that doesn't mean we can't apply Complete Streets principles, and wouldn't apply Complete Streets principles to just our general infrastructure projects. And then we have some larger projects that we're working on, including our downtown, adding to this, the Great Plain Ave, and building that section out to embrace more multimodal principles. And then also the Highland Ave corridor, we're applying, as David Montgomery mentioned, to the MPO for some funding to have that area evaluated and potentially have the state or federal government provide funding to help us rehabilitate that entire corridor. All those projects would have Complete Streets philosophy as part of how they're being designed or constructed, but having a committee to help us provide direction on where we should start with those resources would be helpful.
So, and people understand the Highland Ave corridor, of course, it connects to the work that's being done now in Newton, coming across the bridge up to the fire station. So it would be able to connect to that. In the work that's been done by the state so far, it includes provisions for incorporating bike lanes and things like that. I still am not sure how those bike lanes are going to fare in snowstorms, but we'll see. And that had been a concern with the design all along. But certainly if we were to be able to carry that forward in such a way to provide better access for bikes, in addition to our pedestrians and cars along that stretch, it would represent an improvement over where we are today. Okay.
It would probably also include improved signaling, which is very expensive, coordinated signaling, so that if you drove up all along the corridor, it would presumably be timed in a way that optimized your travel.
And then I did forget to mention one example of a project that sort of touches almost all of the components here is the Central Ave Center Street Bridge from Needham into Dover. It's an area that's really of public infrastructure, but we're looking at adding, right now the current bridge doesn't provide any right of way for us to be able to add either pedestrian or bike accommodation. To be frank, it doesn't even provide full vehicle accommodation based on its width. And so rehabilitating that bridge or replacing that bridge is going to give us the opportunity to be able to add bike lanes, pedestrian lanes, and then also tying it sort of into the rail trail and potentially into the MBTA. It would also allow us to be able to connect the rail trail to that bridge to provide, should Medfield and Dover also develop their rail trails, to provide some connectivity as well. So a lot of the projects that we do in DPW not only touch one of these components or just deal with the physical infrastructure like replacing a bridge, but they also then touch a lot of these elements that have been mentioned from these other committees.
So, Karis, what you're actually suggesting there is at the rail trail, there's not a bridge across the Charles either, right? That we would come off the rail trail, go around through a rebuilt bridge on Central Ave, and then be able to conceivably rejoin the rail trail on the other side, rather than building two bridges. That might be a solution that can work for both. So it's being smart about the way that we're spending our dollars.
Just to be clear, there is a bridge, there is the trestle bridge over into Dover that would need a lot of rehab work.
I was going to say, but it's not currently safe, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah,
correct.
So either we're having to rehab significant dollars there. The question is, where's the best place to put our dollars? And it's,
I just want to make sure everyone knew that it's not that there was no bridge there. There was a bridge. And the bigger issue with Dover is Dover actually approving their trail.
Dover needs some Dimitris who are on the trail, who are willing to bring their neighbors along in Dover.
Oh, they have, we could have a long conversation about what's going on in Dover, and maybe we should sometime, but not here.
Okay. Any other comments? Jackie, do you want to weigh in on anything? I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but if you do, comments are welcome.
I think just generally, I mean, first of all, it's just great to hear this discussion. I'm excited, again, as a resident to be engaged in these issues. And then I think at any point in the process, if it would be helpful, myself or different colleagues regularly go to different communities to kind of explain processes and so much is changing, and there's a whole new realm of like state grants and different funding opportunities. So at any time it would be helpful, can also share information or resources.
Well, I guess I would say, to the extent that there is some new state funding opportunity that you think we should be taking advantage of that we're missing. I do know, as Kara said, so many people are now in Complete Streets that the promise of the Complete Streets money is less attractive than it was even a few years ago. So understanding where the state is currently providing funding opportunities is always a valuable piece of information.
Yeah, and for Complete Streets, there's a cap on dollar value, but not necessarily number of grants. So I don't know how much, maybe Needham has already maxed out the dollar value. But it's based on dollar value, not just number of grants. There's multiple open grants now. Shared Streets and Spaces just opened. It's due March 1. Lots of funding available. Mass Trails for trail related work due February 1. There's a number of new ones, one around like traffic signals, improvements. So, pass along the link so you're aware of it, but there's a new municipal portal. That's a great summary of all the different opportunities.
Thank you. David?
I just wanted to say that my memory is that the Complete Street concepts, as Karis referred to, are regularly scored on the MPO projects. And so even if it's not coming from the Complete Street silo of funding, it's nonetheless causing projects to rise higher on that scale. And the Needham Street Highland Avenue corridor is just such a project.
I do think that any project that gets designed, one of the questions that will be in front of somebody here will be whether any project that gets designed with those principles in mind, for example, which I don't think we have done consistently in the past. And so it's something that would be changing to make that something we adopt. Justin.
Complete Streets.
Sure.
I mean, I think there's a lot of belief out there that there is a fairly sharply codified set of, do this and do that and do that, and that's Complete Streets, and this isn't. And I mean, I like what I've been hearing from Karis about, yes, a network and prioritization. It does have to make sense, but the fact that this idea is out there, and the National Association of County and Town Transportation Officials, has a big book of everything that's ever been done anywhere that you could call Complete Streets. And some people do come to the conclusion that you should sort of do all of that everywhere. And if you literally try to do that, I went through the exercise with Cambridge a few years ago and sort of said, okay, you got a 4-lane, 48-foot street. If you do everything, the physically separated bike lane and the transit lane and everything, it comes to somewhere between 80 and 85 feet for what used to be a 4-lane street. So as long as we have, I'm sure we're being intelligent about what we're putting forward and networking and having an overall plan, but I think there are some corners where Complete Streets is kind of a magic wand for all kinds of advocacy. And at some point, judgment does have to be exercised.
So I don't disagree with you at all, Duncan, and my apologies if that was an impression that I left. But I do think you're right. Within the bounds of a master plan, there are places where that does become a standard. And there are other places where you think about how you can be thoughtful in your approach to any work that's being done, but you're also considering what are the traffic volumes there? How does that fit and what makes sense? So, Justin.
Sure. And I know we're looking at short, mid and long term kind of solutions to transportation in Needham. One of the really short term that I think I kind of tangentially mentioned was one of the pain points of TMAC is not necessarily having exactly what Kara said. What is going on next summer, so that we know when we do next time we get Warren and some of these streets, we can say that there are plans to do this, therefore that can be, because the public really, I mean, it's a credibility issue. And then suddenly we don't have any information that we can give them, whether this is just in the planning stage or whether it's something that's in the funding stage or wherever it may be, almost a quarterly status of, what our longer term plans are, so that we can at least give the public that this is what we're thinking, and so that they don't just feel that, like I really feel, and everyone on that committee really feels the pain of these residents and people who bring these concerns, when we know that it might be a longer, we just don't know, you know what I mean? And we're going to just talk about something saying, what's also interesting, and I wanted to mention it when we were talking about this for next year or next summer, my understanding is that redesign was stopped because of someone didn't want the geometric improvements to affect their house. And there was an abutter issue historically on the end of Dedham and Harris. There was a re-engineering that was going to go on about 10 years ago, and it was in pre-study or it was in study phase, and then they couldn't get the abutters. There was calls to select board, there was calls to this, they stopped it. So it was a political stop. But then that information never gets out, so we have to then tell these anecdotal stories, and and of course 10 years later or 12 years later, some of the stuff is right, some of the stuff is wrong, some of the stuff is through this lens, and we're the ones that have to convey that information to the public. So it is frustrating. And so that's just kind of a pain point that I think that we can look to see. That's kind of a lower hanging fruit. If there was actual, information that we could convey to be able to, help us better communicate with the public with regards to some of these longer strategic capital plans.
Karis?
So I think that information is really helpful. I think one of the struggles we've always had in DPW about going too far into the future is the unknown variables. So, even when we talk about our infrastructure improvement plan, when we go in front of town meeting, it's always really hard to say, like, we have an anticipation of what roads we're going to do, but there are things that happen as far as maybe this is actually a thing we haven't talked about at all, but it's so important, is the utility work that happens in Needham. So the natural gas expansion that has been happening in town, whether it's services, whether it's improving the lines, whether it's dealing with the now mandated work that they have to do to replace old infrastructure, that generally ends up disrupting. I know, like, Mark Tree is one that just comes up in my head that we've been talking about in DPW for a long time, and it's not that it's not a priority for us. It's simply that every time we're about to do something, it seems that we get a call from a utility who's ready to, they're just 1 year away from fixing something there, and there's no way we would want to do a complete redesign of a location just to have it torn up the next year. So I think it's useful, maybe even if it's thinking about the types of resources that we'd be looking for in the future, is some advocates, citizen advocates, to explain that we have a plan, and this plan is for, it's usually 17 miles of road, but that plan is variable based on, and then, who can articulate all the different factors that we have to deal with, including weather and some other things. So totally. That's really useful information.
Okay. Keith?
Yeah, just Karis brought up something I hadn't really thought of, but is there any utility company representation on any of these committees, I mean, I guess I'm sure all roads end at the DPW, I'm sure. So I'm sure you guys are in good communication, but maybe they don't have the same, oversight with all these various groups, right? And so, like you said, it's hard to move forward when the utility company could be planning something around the corner that, other members of the committees present here don't know about.
The answer would be no, there is not any utility representation on any of these committees. And I'm sitting here and I don't know what Karis thinks, but I'm not sure that we would be able to find a person who would be able to represent all the potential range of projects that might be contemplating. I think even at utilities, they come out of left field. So
I can imagine that would be difficult. Yeah.
I think
Even
there should be a
changes of
pledge.
how,
Sorry.
there's gonna say even just changes of house. So even, taking out plans or not having plans, when a house gets sold and then a new house gets developed, we even on our own side, water and sewer services, we used to go ahead of all of the projects in town, and we would lay water and sewer in particular, the homes that had septic, knowing that when the house was rehabbed or torn down, that they would reconnect. But because so many houses in town are being completely redesigned and the house was changing on the property, where we would just logically put a sewer line made no sense for the design that would happen, 2 or 3 years down the line. So I imagine that the natural gas companies have the same issue where somebody's lived in a house forever, they don't want to upgrade, and then they leave and then someone comes in. So there's the planned work, and I think there's a lot of variables the utilities have to deal with there. But then there's also the customer demanded work as well that it sometimes ends up being an issue when it comes to the work that we do in DPW.
I would also object unless they were to agree to stop double polling.
Oh, double poll.
If they made a pledge, then we can talk.
Double poll. Don't bring up that topic here. We'll never get anywhere.
Yeah, just the coordination of it all is, it sounds extra complicated, when you have private companies trying to, do their business, somehow still not affect the things that you're planning here.
Yeah. Kevin.
Yeah, hey, quick clarifying question for David and Duncan. The Transportation Committee is keeping an eye on MassDOT, right? And Duncan, you're on the advisory boards for MBTA and the adult table and the kids table. Do we have 6 sets of eyes on MBTA, and do we need that many? Do we need both?
I guess my opinion is that, of course, we ought to avail ourselves of the opportunity of having an MBTA advisory board representative. And there are some towns that just don't appoint anybody. And I think it's just, it is a circuit that, it's not terribly demanding in terms of time, but it's one way of learning what's going on, keeping abreast of what's going on. And it is a route to get to attention with MBTA. The committee as a whole, I think historically, has interpreted its mandate as relating to the MBTA, which means that the committee is, periodically just looking at how the MBTA is doing and offers, again, another route for the select board to express opinions or pass concerns along. It's a, arguably there's several faces associated with it. Much of the activity does revolve around the rail, but it is an important aspect of life in Needham. So I don't know. I mean, in terms of you're talking about sort of configuration, I think the holding in the MAPC seat as well, is kind of like, we would not be doing the town a favor by not having representatives.
Okay.
Yeah.
My take is that it is redundant for us to be, I think that the more efficient use of time would be to rely on the kind offices of Duncan wearing that hat,
okay,
and not expect the committee. In theory, it's fine for our committee to do this work, but it's been my experience in the last few years that several times that we've geared up to provide our advice in a form that we're familiar doing that, a joint memo to the select board / town manager, it really has not been eye-opening for them to receive that for the most part. It's been sort of like, please don't interfere with what we're already doing. That's the message we've gotten, not in those words, but that's kind of
Yeah.
the message we've interpreted.
Yeah. So yeah, we've kind of, backed off a bit sort of over the last year or two and sort of said, well, you've heard us and we know that we've been heard. And yeah, there was certainly some, we're not quite sure where the committee ought to go or what it should be doing. And the mandate is a little bit, it's a good time to be exploring it.
All right, thank you.
Okay. So do we have some idea of what some of the challenges are? Okay. Karis, I'm looking at the agenda and seeing framework for evaluation process. Oh, Justin?
I just in one just to something that's stuck into me. We also are kind of missing the planning and development side of things, where where there are and there will be, and now probably more so with the statutory change going from 2/3 to 1/2. There's going to be a lot more chances for development basically to come in and planning, and that's going to involve, there's traffic around there, there are those unintended consequences that come with the development. I don't know where that feeds into any sort of holistic transportation planning, and I think we have to be vigilant about how we as whatever we recommend, whatever it's a committee or whatever, we just improve what's currently there. I think we also have to think about both it's really important to think about the planning aspect of things, because when planning board does what they do, it has an impact, and that can be in a silo, and then suddenly there's now a traffic issue that is then going to be, people want mitigation for, whether that's through the standard operations of DPW to do the mitigation, or whether that comes up through TMAC, or whether someone complains to the select board, or wherever that may be, it's going to be an impact. And I don't necessarily think that there's eyes on that in the future in terms of just the traffic and transportation impact of any such developments in the future. So I think just as we look forward, that is something that I think is important to at least have some eyes on.
Do we, I'm just throwing this out, some of you may know, I don't know. Are there communities that have a transportation master plan that might be an exemplar that could be useful for us to just understand and think about?
I think, maybe I would ask Jackie if maybe she would have some idea, but I think Wellesley, from what I've heard, kind of does a pretty good job at kind of holistic townwide traffic and transportation management. I haven't put my eyes on a plan, but I would see if anyone else has any.
Well, so they're also not without their traffic jams, but yes, Duncan.
Yeah, I did a very preliminary look at that. Just trying to think of in terms of, who might our peers be in terms of other towns, communities with, the presence of similar issues, with the presence of similar population density, commuter rail, being near, a limited access highway, what have you, being basically our form of government. And, I had a very, very preliminary screening, and it's certainly good that Wellesley, is something. Wellesley has an active committee. It's really coming from the green side of things rather than transportation functionality. But they do have, in effect, a sort of a green plan, which has a transportation component. And, but the reason I mentioned the idea of peers is, you can go out and you can look at a Brookline or a Cambridge or someplace, and they've got resources and size and population that really doesn't track with us very closely. I did preliminary short list. I came up with Reading, Braintree, Wellesley, Dedham, and Norwood as places where I think it might be interesting to see what they have in the way of a committee structure and a transportation plan. So that was a notion that occurred to me, which, we can pursue if people are interested.
Okay.
Wellesley is kind of an interesting case because not only are they a peer, but they're a neighbor, and taking a regional approach towards various issues makes sense for us to coordinate with them, even if we have a different approach. I mean, I think we should be in dialogue with them regardless of what they're doing. And they are quite active, not just as a town. I won't come up with a name right now, but there's a select board member who is quite active, focused on transportation issues. And there's also, they play an active role in the Metro West RTA.
They do.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who the current person is on transportation issues. It was Ellen Gibb for years, and she's now off the board, and I don't know who's really taken that on as part of their portfolio. So interesting question.
Yeah, the name escapes me, but I think they're representative to both the MBTA and the WRTA. Is the same person.
Okay.
I can find the name quickly for you, Marianne. Offline, I'll find it for you.
Yeah.
All right.
There was one other thing along those lines I'd like to share, is that we identified as a committee things we kind of would love to do for the town if we could, and this is in a prior era, and maybe it's not, but it's kind of the way we're thinking. We wanted to evaluate the bus service. We wanted to evaluate the shuttles serving the town in various ways and figuring out ways to have a coordinated approach toward that. And lastly, we wanted to work somehow on some of these big investment infrastructural projects and advise the town. Now, that's an awful lot for one committee to do, but I think all of those should be in the mix here. And with respect to the shuttle stuff, getting back to what Justin alluded to, historically, it's been my perspective that the planning board looks at things on a project by project basis and then says, okay, how are we going to mitigate the traffic coming out of this new thing? Nobody is ever saying, how are we going to have a coordinated shuttle service? And then each new project fits in with that coordinated service. And I would love for us to be able to think that way. And when I've asked people about that, sometimes the answer has been, well, you can't do it that way. You just can't. That's not how it's done. But my understanding is there are towns in the Commonwealth that have figured out how to do it that way. And Cambridge, I think, would be notably top of the list. So.
Yeah, I do think that that is an area that has come up several times as something that we could do a much better job of. So keeping track of it is something that belongs in a new portfolio, I think is a good thing. Anybody else on any other committee, or do you have a wish list that's similar, or whatever's on it, or what's not happening? Okay. Karis, you've moved to unmic. Do you have a thought?
So I was just going to say, I think it's the larger projects and smaller projects as far as the prioritization that's missing. So it's not just the prioritization on need. DPW staff can do the need component very well, but need is sort of subjective, and looking at what communities or what parts of the community might be better served, I think would be helpful as well.
Okay. I do not have a framework to propose, and I actually would almost like to defer that to our next meeting now that we've sort of taken everything in, with the hopes that maybe we can convene a small group that can bring back at least a straw man for people to talk about next time, having heard the discussion this evening. So I think it might make more sense for us to think about what our meeting schedule might look like, for us to task a small group to maybe think about bring back a straw man on an evaluation framework. And I also think it might be good to think about, what Duncan suggests. Are there a couple of people or a few people who might be willing to take a town, research what transportation committee structure they have, do they have a plan of these 5 that we listed, just to see if there are any models out there or anything that strikes somebody as being a piece we should keep track of as we're doing our overall planning. So those are sort of the pieces that I identify thinking about the discussion we've had tonight. Keith.
Yeah, I just, there we go. I just wanted to say, it's, I think it's been very helpful to hear, you know, from people in these committees where they could use the most help. And I'm trying to take good notes, and I'll be sure to watch the Zoom meeting again, but, you know, maybe seeing it written down, I don't know, I hate to make more work for everybody, but I find it incredibly helpful to see, you know, where the gaps are. And then at least it will give us a chance to, you know, especially, you know, Doug and I are members of these committees, but it might be helpful to have like an outside view of just, you know, kind of connecting some dots. I mean, it was really good to hear the parts that these committees are struggling with, you know, and we see some room for, you know, some opportunity to help. So, but it was helpful. So I appreciate that.
Well, and I would have said as much as Justin talked about wanting to have more information so that he can better answer questions that come from people in town. I also suspect that there's a whole tier of business that his committee works on that probably could be handled as a routine matter by staff. And I'm not sure where that line is as well. I think that historically, all of those questions have just gone to TMAC, and it wouldn't be clear to me that they all need to just go to TMAC as a first step. So, I mean, that's another
Agreed.
question.
Yep.
Yeah. Rob, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any thoughts based on what you've heard?
No, nothing from me.
Okay. All right. Taking it in. All right. So I proposed a couple of work streams here. All right. Why don't we tackle the easy part? And I would never say scheduling is easy, but you know, maybe trying to sit here and say, okay, what's our schedule first? I had sort of proposed to all of you when I talked to various people that this was a committee that we would try to meet once a month as we're looking at going forward. So if we can maybe standardize on a night, and maybe it's whatever tonight is. I haven't looked at what Wednesday it is in the month. Karis, is there a reason why sticking with this particular week is not a good plan?
I don't have any reason not to continue with the third Wednesday.
The third Wednesday, is that possible?
The only question, I don't know if it's relevant for others, it actually isn't for me, but just to highlight, is whether in February that falls during vacation week, school vacation week.
It does not.
Okay, great.
I don't think I have any issues with that. So
Third Wednesday?
Works for me. Yeah.
My goodness, easiest scheduling thing I've done in like years, I think. All right. So Karis, if we can put those dates on the calendar, and we will also get them out to everybody on the next agenda so everyone has them, that would be great. This question of being willing to take a look at a town just to see what they have in terms of transportation plan or transportation committee. Duncan had sort of done some preliminary research and suggested 5 towns: Wellesley, Reading, Braintree, Dedham, and Norwood. My question is, do we have some number of people who might be willing to take on a town? Is that a yes, I'll take on a town, or do you have a comment?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm hopeful that there may be people, you know, who know people personally in some of these places that would help. The only other thing I've done is for, I guess, Braintree and Wellesley, I went through their town websites and clipped out everything I thought was relevant to transportation. It's a rather disorganized, you know, collage of bits, but, you know, I'd be willing to finish that exercise for the other towns on that list. But then we need to, you know, an action plan based on that. You know, somebody might, go through that list and say, oh yeah, I know that committee, or I know that person, or whatever. And obviously something better than a pure cold call might be a good thing. And whether that should come from somebody who's a town employee is another consideration there.
Well, or I've often found that people in towns are fairly responsive if you reach out and say, I'm in XYZ town, I'm working on this matter, but we could figure that out. All right. If you have a preference for a town to take, do you want to tell me that? And then I would also propose if you could create a summary that we can get to Karis like a week before our meeting, then we'll be able to send something out, and then you'll be able to talk to it for the group. Ideally, that would be what I'd like to see us do. David.
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to take on Wellesley because I've sort of initiated a conversation that I could follow up on.
Okay. Any other takers who want to pick a town?
I don't have a preference.
I don't have a preference. Give me who you need.
Okay. Duncan, do you have a suggestion for order of covering towns?
I kind of read them up there. They were very close. The first 4 or 5, I went through this whole numeric ranking system. You don't want to know about it, trust me. But there was a clump. It was the Reading, Braintree, Wellesley, Dedham, and Norwood. There were, Burlington and Lexington sort of came up, but they don't really have commuter rail. I think that almost, takes them off the list. And then you start getting into Saugus and Milton and places, but the ones I mentioned really seem to be the ones that stood out. I'm certainly happy to take one. It doesn't much matter. I have some South Shore in my background. I could sign up for Braintree.
All right, Braintree's yours. I'm going to nominate Kevin. How about Dedham? And Doug on Norwood? Does that work? All right, Reading. Anybody want to take Reading?
Sure, I'll take Reading, Marianne. I'm happy to.
Thank you, Keith.
And Marion, I can get, if people are having difficulty connecting, I can get contacts, particularly for Wellesley, Dedham, and Norwood. And I have a person who used to work in Reading who I could certainly reach out to. So if you have any difficulty, let me know.
Well, I was going to say, maybe Karis, if you would be able to make a connection for each of those and just shoot an email that connects a couple people, that would be great. Okay. We also need a work stream on creating a straw man for an evaluation plan. So, Karis, are you working with me on that?
Can do.
Anybody else want to join us for that one?
Join us for that.
I'd love to join perhaps after February at some point.
Okay.
But,
all right, we'll see what we can
You can
get.
join me for that.
Marion, what are you doing? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
So we're going to try to figure out what kind of a straw man we can create and bring back to the group about an evaluation plan for how we look at these different proposals.
Okay.
Okay. So Justin, you'll join us. That would be great. And we'll bring that back. Does that sound like a piece of work for next time? And we'll have another layer of the onion to discuss.
Perfect, thanks.
That works.
Okay. Any other comments for tonight?
Just a question, Marianne. Are you asking for some type of summary report on each town in advance of the meeting, something we can circulate, or just at the meeting?
I would love to have something in advance of the meeting that we can circulate. Yes, please. Okay. And they can be all different formats. I recognize everybody has their own styles. We're not going to define a style, but just that can be something that we can circulate, that people can think about, and that you'll be able to talk to sort of share your findings with the group.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank everybody for getting us kicked off tonight. I want to thank Karis for actually pulling together. It was helpful to me to read just the various bits about each committee as background. And then I appreciated each of you speaking about the work that you were doing in your committee and the challenges there. I know we can do better. So I appreciate all of you joining me in this quest to, quest is too big a word, right? Because we're gonna get to a real result. So I look forward to that happening over the next 6 months and figuring out where we're gonna go next and how in fact we're going to be able to recognize the vision that several of you articulated of being more conscientious, thorough, and steadfast in our pursuit of some of these dollars to help us realize what the town would like to see happen for transportation. So terrific, thank you. Do we need a motion to adjourn, I suppose? So I would welcome one.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Technically, we need a roll call vote, but I'm gonna hope we can ignore that on this committee. Am I gonna be held to it, Karis, or can we?
We didn't actually
say-
read the beginning, so we're supposed to, you know, but anyways.
Okay.
So we can all do this.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed to adjourning? All right, thank you all. We will see you in a
Thank you.
month, if not before.
That's
Thank
great. Thank you.
you.